Hello, welcome to the GW Books Club, where me and my friend Stu are reading through classic works from the history of Games Workshop. Traditionally, we've been looking at some of the earliest fiction published by Games Workshop, but this is one of our non-fiction episodes where we're looking at an Armies book, the Warhammer Armies High Elves book from the 4th edition, the very first High Elves dedicated book. Stu, do you have any memories of that High Elf book? Did you own this back in the day?
No, I didn't. I had High Elves with the launch of the edition, the 4th edition, like everyone else who bought the box, but I didn't buy. I mean, we come across this when we talked about the Empire book a little bit. I didn't buy the army books at that point. I was at a stage where I was playing Warhammer, but also starting to play some historical games. And I was still using the kind of get you by army list booklet for all of my games. Maybe it's just my age, I suppose, and didn't have the expendable income. But I didn't buy it that time around. So it's been nice. It feels very familiar because it's very much the game of that era. Yeah. But I didn't own the book then, no.
No, well, see, that's a shame. I did have this at one point, although I was a Dark Elf player for a longer time than I was a High Elf player. But same as yourself, having had the 4th edition box, you were kind of compelled to get either or an Orcs and Goblins or a High Elf army at some point. So I ended up doing both. But yeah, I mean, even if it weren't something that you owned at the time, you're right. It is very, it's very nostalgic. It's very familiar, isn't it? Because this was where they really worked out, I think, how to write armies books of this era. So they are stuffed full of information. There's loads of great stories, loads of great lore, all of the rules that you need. Like structurally, it's just a really nice way to get to know a faction, I think.
Yeah.
And it's just really successful. And all of, I think most, if not all, of the armies books from this era. But it's really successful at getting you to like love the faction it's about. I think they probably better than any other era. It does just make you go, you know what? These are probably the coolest guys in the game. And then you read a different armies book the following week, and you're like, oh no, these are the coolest guys.
I agree completely. I think the other thing, the reason they feel so familiar is because quite a lot of it is lifted from White Dwarf articles that you would have read, even if you didn't own the books. So it feels like stuff you've seen before because you have seen it before. Not as in its entirety, but there's a battle report in this, which we'll come up to later, which is just a White Dwarf article, and there's stuff like that, I think, as well.
Yeah, completely. And there's another thing about it as well, actually. There's just like, it's just how comprehensive these books are. So this really is everything you need to know to be a High Elf player. So obviously you get the army list. It updates what was in the Battle Bestiary from the 4th edition box. That's great. You've got all your special rules for war machines and how they differ to everything else. But then it's also this comprehensive history of the faction in a way that was, you didn't actually get as much information about High Elves anywhere else before this. Some of it's covered in White Dwarf. Not as much of the High Elf stuff had been explored as, say, the Empire or even the Eldar that we've talked about previously. They had loads of stuff in White Dwarf, whole series of articles or super in-depth articles that kind of were like a pilot, a test of the lore in the background. There's some of that for the High Elves, but this book is really right. We're bringing together everything you need to know if you want to be a High Elf fan. You're going to find all of the cool stuff here.
Yes, you can see how it's evolved from very recently looking at that Empire book. You could see how they've tuned in on some of that. Maybe some of the things I picked up on I thought was a little bit odd about that book. As much as I loved it, they seem to have dialed back. The contents, for example, is still very detailed here, but it's just one page rather than being 2 pages with almost indexed within the contents. And it just feels like they've learned some of that stuff from doing the Empire book and tidy back. Something else that was in the Empire book, they doubled up on some stuff. So big kind of lore descriptions about the army, and then as you went into the unit profiles, a lot of that was repeated but in different words again, and it felt like they were doubling up on information where it's a little bit more streamlined in this, even though there's the same number of pages and words, but there's less repeating of themselves, I suppose.
Yeah, I think that's definitely fair. There's still a little bit of that, It's almost like if you flick straight to the army lists first, you can
Yes.
still understand what everything is, and then you can go back and you get like a timeline that covers the same information you've just had
Yeah.
in a different
Yes.
type of timeline, but it still all adds a certain richness to the book and kind
Hmm.
of gives you everything you
Doesn't
need to
feel
know.
redundant at all, no.
Yeah, it doesn't feel too redundant. Yeah, I think that's a very good way of putting it. I mean, so this one was written by Andy Chambers and Bill King, I think it's credited to,
Yes,
with
yeah.
Jez Goodwin's support as well.
Hmm.
So there is obviously a raft of talent involved in the writing. On the art side, you've got another amazing cover by Jeff Taylor, who was just
Yeah.
knocking it out of the park during this period. In the Army's book covers, the boxed games covers, just really, really impressive stuff. And this, yeah, I think it's a great cover. I don't think I love this one as much as, say, the Eldar cover or some of the others that are around, but I think it is really dynamic and very cool, though.
Yes, it's really in your face still, isn't it? Very
Very in your
vibrant and
face.
bright. Almost the
Yeah.
the same way as the Eldar one was that we've looked at recently.
Yeah.
And that makes sense. They're both elvish of
Sure.
some
Yeah.
kind.
Yeah.
I'm with you on that. I like most of it. I'm guessing that's Teclis at the front, or supposed to be, is it,
Yes, I
without
think
his
so.
hammer?
Yeah.
And I don't like his face as much, but the rest of it I really, really like. So it's a little minor thing, but it is quite cool and very of its time and era with
It
its
is,
colouring.
yeah, absolutely. And then inside, loads of amazing art. Again,
Hmm.
there's some John Blanche stuff. There are pieces by Wayne England and Dave Gallagher and Mark Gibbons. So again, a familiar roster of Games Workshop artists during this period, all with slightly different styles, and they all bring something slightly different. I don't think
Hmm.
there's any one artist who really dominates the art in this book. Maybe Mark Gibbons a little, because some of the sort of the stark images of the different units are by Gibbons.
Yes.
But there's a lot of different styles. It still feels like it still gives a sort of uniform view of the elves, though. I don't think they're distracting in their difference.
No, it all works. I think it's only John Blanche that's done the full page pictures. I think.
Yeah, I think that's probably
There's not
right.
there's not as many either. There's
No.
only two or three maybe in the whole book. Two might just be the two. So
Yeah.
maybe that's why it feels quite well tied in together, because the types of art that are used in different places of the book
Mm.
are consistent, because it's using just one artist to do those
Yeah, and they're
kind of
small,
things.
like you say,
Yeah,
smaller spot
vignette kind of
illustration.
style of
Yeah,
things.
yeah.
So, excuse me. So that might be what it is. But yeah, they all fit, even though there's a slight stylistic differences. They all seem to fit throughout the book, and the
They
themes
do.
just to work quite
Yeah,
well.
and lots of great pieces to choose from. I mean, is there a favorite piece for you?
Well, we were talking about this beforehand, and there's a few I
Yeah.
like, and then I sort of cheated with my decision. I love the maps. It's
Okay.
art, and I love both pages of maps in this. Your overall map of Ulthuan, and then the secondary one that kind of gives you an idea of the different campaigns and attack trajectories of the different races that attack them. I just loved it. I just really, really enjoyed it, and I think it dovetailed very well with the vast and detailed history of the High Elves that is in this book. It gives you a nice visual companion to it.
Yeah, I think that's a great shout, actually. Because, yeah, I agree. It's really impactful. You got full
Mm.
page Ulthuan map, which is really, really nice, and just gives you loads of detail. Like it couples with the sort of the geography that you're
Yes.
given of all the different regions, the different kingdoms of the elves. And then you also get a sort of more detailed map of, okay, and here's where the Dark Elves have been attacking from, and here's where Grom the Paunch turned up from, and stuff like that,
Yes.
which is really cool because it gives it that kind of, then you're looking at a sort of a history book map of wars and like, where and when and how. So I think that's a great shout. Yeah, really, really nice pieces. For me, I think that there is, again, like you say, there's a lot of contenders. I'm kind of torn. I really like there's a one-page piece by John Blanche that is sort of an array of different elves, and they all look really cool. Particularly and it's actually one of the miniatures that was sculpted as well, I think, by Jez Goodwin. But he's wearing like a horned helm, He's one of the
Yes.
champions, yeah, and he amongst the units, and he just looks kind of a bit more wild, I suppose, almost.
It was the high elf era of the ridiculous hat,
Oh,
wasn't
some
it?
real
That kind
ridiculous
of
hats for sure. Yeah, yeah. But then there's a couple of other smaller pieces that I think are really nice as well. There's another, I think it's a John Blanche piece called the Straits of Lothern, which has
uh-huh.
just got, it's just the river that runs through through these two sort of cliff sides, and there's a dragon rider just flying across.
Yeah, I do like that piece.
Really,
Really
really
nice.
nice, really evocative of the sort of the high elf lands. And then there is also one of the Mark Gibbons pieces that I think is just kind of timeless, which is the Swordmaster of Hoeth,
I'm just
who
looking at it now. I was going to bring it up
amazing,
myself as really dark and brooding.
really dark and brooding.
And
Yeah,
yeah, I agree completely.
yeah, he's great. Yeah, and it because it's also like, I mean, again, big helmet and like a big sort of chubby cheeked kind of faceplate to this guy,
Yeah,
but it still looks like you say there is a darkness to it. There's a stoicism. There's this guy is serious. This is a serious swordmaster, and
yeah. If you've
you're
got
not
a
going to
tower
mess
that
with.
needs guarded, he's your man,
Yeah,
or your
yeah.
elf.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, loads of really, really cool pieces there, and just really good stuff. But yeah, you talked there about the rich history that we get. So you get the really cool map, and that's
Yeah.
combined with like a load of detail, not just about the lands of Ulthuan, but the rulers and the sort of the history and the story of it. I mean, what's your sort of general view of the background as a whole?
I think he's great. We talked about this again. I'm going to refer to the Empire book. In that video, if people have seen it, they would have heard this before. But it feels like they're always presented in a different way during this era,
Hmm.
where you kind of get an introduction to the faction as it is now in many ways, and then we delve back into from the beginning and the birth of the faction and that deeper lore. So you've got a kind of the faction today and some of the main things and the main troop types, like a broad brush stroke of it, which gives you a nice kind of introduction. These are the high elves if you want to go and play them on a tabletop. And then we move into this, what is huge and a lot of text. And when I first looked at it, I was like, whoa, we got pages. So there's some pages that are just double column, pure text,
Yeah,
no, next to no pictures. And I thought, oh, okay. But again, it's written, I say again, because I'm referring to myself in the previous video, but again, it's written in a way that it just reads as a history. It's not overly flowery language. So it's not too dry, but it's also not so filled with expressive narrative that it goes in one ear and out the other. And that might just be what I respond to as a reader and what suits me. Other people might prefer different, but it went in and stayed in, which doesn't always happen when I read law. I love law, but quite often I find it more accessible through novels than I do, and then some of the way it's written in some of the later books. And again, it's just really well done. But there's a lot. It takes you
there
through
is.
each Phoenix kin right up to the present one, which interestingly comes to power just before the period of the old world, which is
Indeed.
quite
Yeah.
handy as well. But I really enjoyed it. I really enjoyed it, and I've probably through all the years of wargaming, and being a bit of being aware of high elves, I probably understand their history and lore more now than I ever have from reading this book cover to cover,
Yeah.
which is mad when you think about it. I've owned different high elf books before, but the experience of reading this objectively, I found it a really good way of kind of ingesting all of that information.
Yeah, I can totally see that because it is, in the best possible way. It's like a history book, right?
Mm.
You are getting a complete history of the High Elves, and you are starting from when they first became the High Elves, right the way through all of the different Phoenix Kings, all of these different wars with the forces of chaos, with the Dark Elves, with the Dwarves, with the Dark Elves again, and so on. There's like some really, really good mythology being built here. And I think that this is absolutely the right place for that in the Warhammer
Yeah.
world. You get the Empire, which is much more human history, which makes
Hmm.
sense, right? But it's much closer to a sort of human history, as obviously a shorter time scale. There is still some, legends as part of that story and Sigmar and all that sort of stuff. But here, We get the elves who are proper, they are because they're drawing on lots of not just Tolkien and Paul Anderson and other authors like that. Whether that's Moorcock and the Elric stories. So you've got all of this rich fantasy fiction that's being drawn on to inform this story. But all of those guys were also influenced by myths and legends from our world, from the Norse sagas and all that sort of stuff. So all of that's kind of filtering through into these stories that we get for the High Elves, which are just big, epic, tragic tales where everything goes wrong and it's really, really bad. And, there's lots of moments of everything's about to end and collapse. And then it's just the sheer nobility or the like they just will not yield, some of these guys. They step up and you get these triumphant moments. So the actual story of the High Elves, I was really, really invested reading through it because there's so many ups and downs and these legendary characters fighting these impossible battles. It really brings it to life in a way that I think is really hard to do. I mean, I think, if you take a look at, say, the Old World core book, I think there's some really cool writing in there and some really good stuff. Some of the prehistory there, because there's so much of it condensed into such a small amount of space, I feel it's quite difficult to get as invested as I would like in some of that stuff.
Yes.
Here,
I agree.
It's real. There's like proper characters. Oh man, I felt really bad for the first. I think it's Kelador the First. I think he takes as the name, right? And he takes it in honor of. So it's not actually Kelador the mage. It is a prince called Imric who takes the name Kelador when he becomes Phoenix King, and he's this great king, and he is taking over after the first Phoenix King, who's had a rough time, right? But saved everyone from chaos. So Kelador takes over and he does everything right and he lives an amazing life and he's awesome for the elves and does all of this good stuff and wages a war against the Dark Elves and forces them away. He's faced with the ultimate temptation, the Sword of Cain, and he could go down the dark path that the first king went down, Anarion. And he says no, because he's nails and he's just a great lad. Right? And then his death is so sad. I was absolutely gutted. His ship is separated from the rest of the fleet. He gets blown into the coast of Nagaroth, where all the Dark Elves are. They're surrounded. The entire Dark Elf fleet is bearing down on his ship. And he just is like, well, I can't be taken captive, so I'm just going to have to jump into the sea in full plate armor. And sink to the bottom. And it's just like, man, that is brutal. And it even says that I think it's really, really good in the actual text itself, where it just says that it's a bad death for a good king or something to that effect.
Yeah, and very nicely written.
Really nice. And it really hit me. It was just such a great, like a telling of this guy, just a good king. Yeah, I was quite sad. I was quite sad, quite affected by this story. And there's loads of that. There's loads of these amazing stories.
And then his son's an idiot.
Yes, and then his son is just rubbish. Oh, it's just really rubbing salt into the wounds. Brutal stuff.
It's good they even use that tale to sort of explain the way that the succession is planned, and the High Elves learned that Hereditary wasn't the best way to
big mistake.
To pick your next Phoenix King, because his son wasn't up to the task as well. So it's very interesting, and they're not all big warriors in terms of what they do. They've all got very distinct personalities, but all, apart from Kelador II, all bring something useful.
But then
to the table, don't they? They all have their own things. You've got the Scholar King, you've got the poet, you've got the impetuous. They all do something to sort of expand the narrative of the High Elves and lead you on that story of why they are what they are.
Yeah,
And going back to a little bit what I was saying earlier, but you had the initial lore which sort of told you about the different locations within Ulthuan and all the stuff you expect. You've got the Lothan and the Bottom and the Sea Elves and all of that kind of thing. And then you get to this, and I was a little bit, like I said, there's loads of text. I thought this could take a bit, could be a bit of a push to get through this. But yeah, I probably enjoyed it more than that first section, and I really enjoyed the first section. So it was very well done, very well
yeah.
done.
It's really rich and vibrant, and like you say, those descriptions of because they set up Ulthuan as being a collection of kingdoms.
Yeah,
So it is not like there is a Phoenix King and the Queen as well. You have a Queen, but it's not like all not they're basically creating the opportunity for if you want to fight high elves against high elves, well, it's in the world, it exists. You
yeah,
can have elf princes fighting elf princes and no one's going to bat an eye. So that kind of exists within the world. That also allows them to do, well, this region is really good at this, and this region is where all the dragons come from, and this region is where all of the chariots come from, and so on. So you kind of get these different characterful unit options for when you're creating that later on. But there is a real there is character to each of those different places, and they are really brought to life in quite vibrant ways. It makes Ulthuan as a continent feel like a sort of rich, deep place. There's lots of storytelling you can have within this place, which is really nice, I think.
yes, yeah, but more than I thought there would be,
Mm.
and so much of that is added through the personalities of those Phoenix Kings, I think.
Yeah, I mean, the Phoenix King stuff is just great. I mean, Anarion is the first Phoenix King, those first years of chaos entering and basically threatening to destroy the entire world. There's some really cool storytelling there about the cursed sword that he does. So he does succumb to that temptation to pick up this cursed sword to fight against chaos because he thinks that's the only way that he can do it. That then is like the original sin for the elves, and his bloodline is cursed from that point. It then is what sets elves on the road towards the dark elves, towards the Witch King being born and sort of him having his place. So there's some real good stuff in that kind of storytelling as well. The ultimate defeat of chaos being that all of the high mages of the high elves
Yeah,
essentially do a massive ritual on the Isle of the Dead in the center of Ulthuan's inner sea that then creates a vortex of magic that basically drains all of the chaos magic from across the old world and the Warhammer world. But there's a really nice bit of storytelling within that concept being that they have they've sort of set themselves out of time by doing this incredible magic. So they're
yes,
still there, even by the end of the Warhammer world, they're still there chanting away because if they stop, then the spell will not be cast. So it both succeeds in that moment and does drain all of the magic away, but they also damn themselves to be eternally.
to be locked
They're
into that
locked in
time.
casting
Yeah.
the spell, right? So that's like a brutal sacrifice for those guys. There's like a lot of that going on, I think. Brutal sacrifice is part of the
Yes,
high elf
yeah.
DNA.
It's a great idea for the whole Warhammer world. That bit of lore. It's like the overflow on a sink, isn't it? The bit that stops it going on the floor, the little drain, and that vortex in Ulthuan stops there being too much chaos magic, and the world is still coming from the way, from the poles. We have all of this chaos energy coming into the old world, and this vortex just takes the top off all the time, just drains it away enough to just drains it away to keep
You think it's just like
the
when
world alive.
you've overfilled your
That little hole
coffee
at the
cup.
top where underneath your taps, that when you've left the plug in and let the tap on.
But yeah,
Exactly what it is.
it is rough. It's rough that those guys are just got, and there's like an incredible great battle, and Anarian's dragon like is incredible because there's this great sort of set piece scene where Anarian and his dragon are fighting against a greater demon of each type
Yeah.
simultaneously, and it's just like a really cool battle. And the dragon's fighting against the bloodthirster, and obviously it has to sacrifice itself in order to do an incredible breath fire breath that saves Anarion for the moment that then lets him take the sort of final strike. All of that stuff is great. And then the two of them, sort of mortally wounded, fly
Yeah.
off and leave everybody and return the sword, this cursed sword, back to its original altar because that's when Anarion realizes his mistake is that he's taken this cursed sword, he's damned his people, but it's a damnation that's going to take 2,500 years, well, longer, thousands more years than that, to actually have effect. But
Yeah.
he's started them down that path. But he's the best he can do now is to put the sword back and try and stop it from getting any worse.
And disappear off into the sunset.
Yeah, and he disappears, right? And I think even that's quite cool.
Whistling as he leaves the podium. Kind of.
But there's like you get cool stuff. I'm a big fan of this, right? And this is classic Warhammer writing where they go, so he puts the sword back into the altar and then he collapses next to his dragon and they presumably die. But then thousands of years later or hundreds of years later, when the next people who arrive there do, there's no sign of the bodies. His armor is there, but he's not there, and there's no skeleton, there's no dragon, there's none of that. So where did he go? And like that kind of thing, I think is great. I mean, yes, he's probably just dead, and he's Obi-Wan Kenobi vanished into wherever Slanesh
went for a swim.
But like, it's just it's a very cool magical thing. And actually, the sword itself is a good example of that as well, where anybody who looks at it sees a different weapon that's appropriate to them. So when Anarion looks at it, he sees a sword. But for instance, a dwarf might look and see a hammer or an axe, and when Malekith looks at it, he sees a scepter, because that's what's sort of most important to that person. That would be their weapon, and I think that is awesome. That's just cool magic stuff.
Yeah. It doesn't get much cooler than that. It's very well done.
Great. Yeah. What do you think about Malekith then as a character?
I think he's very interesting. I liked he's a low-key kind of character, isn't he? It's that kind of, you want to like him, you also feel a little bit sorry for him. He's obviously manipulated by his mother. You'd always think there could have been another path for him. Well, obviously clearly that's the way it's written and designed to be that way. And I like him. I think he's really, really interesting. And my main exposure to him most recently been reading some of those End Times books as well. So you see him at the other end of the story rather than the beginning, as much as he does reminisce a lot around the Sundering period. But he's a character I'm looking forward to exploring more in more depth, definitely.
Yeah, because we're actually, just as a little heads up for everybody, we're going to be reading Gav Thorpe's Malekith, the first book from his Sundering series, as one of our book clubs for the future as well. So we are going to get deep into the sort of Malekith lore and the story of the elves and see where that goes and talk about that in a future episode. I mean, I think he's a really cool bad guy. I mean, I'm not as keen as sort of where that story goes in the official canon with the End Times. But for me, this version of Malekith we get here, where he is just a bad guy, and yes, there is some unusual circumstances and perhaps some unfortunate circumstances that inform his badness, but there are so many moments when he could have made a different choice. And even, I mean, I quite like the classic sort of approach where he seems to be really good. So he's fair of face and voice, and everyone loves him and thinks he's great, but they also don't think he should be the Phoenix King. And he's like, totally understand. That's absolutely fine. I'm going to be the first one to bend the knee to whoever you choose, and I'm going to be their most loyal, I'm going to pledge my fealty, go off and be ambassador to the dwarves and do all of this other stuff. Like, all of that's really cool, but, really he's actually planning his dark betrayal at the same time.
Yeah. It's almost elements of medieval kind of kings and rulers, especially with the conniving mother that's trying to do the best for standing up for her son in his interests and her interests. But then also, like you say, the conniving thing, it reminds me a little bit of Wars of the Roses stuff. Is he a Richard III in the evil in the Shakespeare kind of sense of it? And
Very,
there's
yeah, yeah,
elements of that in his character, which I kind of like as well. Obviously,
yeah,
not the way the Richard III really was, but the definitely the Shakespeare style
yeah,
um,
yeah.
evil character that was made, and I like all of that, and you can see that kind of playing out.
Yes, yeah, and it's yeah because there is a real it's really dark. I mean, the dark elves are just
Dark.
Yeah, they are. They're irredeemably dark. They're just proper bad, properly committed to chaos, willing to destroy by the end of some of their wars, willing to destroy the entire world. It
Yeah.
just out of spite because they're that
Yes.
spiteful and that
They're
evil.
still angry. Two and a
Yes,
half millennia later, they're still
yes,
angry.
just
They're bloodthirsty and also sexual deviants at the same time.
yes,
It's kind of like
all of it,
you
all
tick
of
all the
it.
boxes. It's like,
Yeah, I mean, I think so. I don't know that. So it's not this is not criticism. I don't think, but if I had any if there were any kind of change that I would make, is only the number of times the Dark Elves sort of reappear on Ulthuan. Now I know that the sort of setup here is that these are mortal enemies. This is the Sundered Elves. The Civil War never ended, so it will continue forever. It will continue to the end of the world. I get that, but just within the storytelling, that means that we get a number of times that the elves they destroy the Dark Elves on Ulthuan, they force them back, they manage to reclaim their homeland. It's a period of peace and expansion. There's a period in there of like 1,000 years of complacency from the High Elves, which is a shame. But because they're constantly having to face against the Dark Elves, it just means they are less present in the rest of the world, in the old world. And I know
yeah,
that's part of the story, and that's the way the whole thing works, and that's just the setup.
yeah,
It's just it's one of those things that just means that it's just because it's cool to have high elves. It's cool to have high elves fighting alongside the Empire and the dwarves and the Wood Elves and the Bretonnians against great enemies like the Tomb Kings or Chaos. That's really cool. And there's a little bit less space for that in this sort of world that's created because they're always busy with the Dark Elves. There's just so many. The Dark Elves keep coming.
I think so. But I think you've probably answered why in your explanation. Then is that this is all set up for the present, which is 2162 onwards with Finubar the Seafarer, with the age of exploration and trade with the old world, which started just before him as well. It kind of opened up that when he was a ambassador or envoy, wasn't he? And I know you're thinking, wouldn't it be fun to explore how the relationship was and play games with him, the era of Caledor the First, or
Yeah,
and you're right, but also what you were describing does exist for most people, probably just in the
sure.
timeline, because most people, I imagine, will play their game and their headcanon will be in the timeline of the present of the
Sure.
book. So
That's
you're
fair.
right,
Yeah,
but
that's fair.
also I think the answer is there that it's just all set up for that history. But it would
Yeah.
you could have swapped out one of the Dark Elf wars with exploration of Lustria or something like that would have been cool. Or
Yeah, I mean, maybe
it
it's
just talk a little bit
just
about the wars with the Norse, doesn't it? A little bit about
yes.
that kind of
There's a
stuff. And
lot of
you've
stuff
got
about Grom.
Grom the Paunch's
Yeah,
invasion as well. So there are other campaigns as well
true.
that are interesting.
Yeah, maybe I just want it all. I want even
I
more stuff.
think you
I
do.
mean, it does give rise actually the Dark Elves being present because you get the story of Tyrion and Teclis is really really cool. I think they're both
Yes.
like I mean I remember like back in the mid '90s, especially amongst my young cohort of fellow gamers, there was always a bit of Mickey taking around to High Elves and Tyrion and Teclis. Like there was because like just because that was the nature of the sort of the world at the time within the hobby would be that you take the
Yeah.
piss out of the elves. No one liked an elf player basically.
Yes.
But actually, in the story, both of those are really interesting characters, and they're both nails, and they're just like there's some really cool stuff around them. What Teclis does, what Tyrion does, like their actual deeds are really heroic. They're the best kind of like fantasy legends, and because just to loop back to that dark elf thing and the fact that they're always dealing with dark elves, they end up having to split up in the time in the Great Incursion of Chaos, Teclis goes off to the old world. Tyrion has to stay and deal with all the Dark Elves on Ulthuan and take care of that. But there's kind of, I don't know if you're familiar with the David Mamet film with Val Kilmer called Spartan.
No, I don't think I
No,
am.
it's I think it's a good film, but there's just a great line of dialogue where they talk about the Spartan kings. Whenever anybody would send for aid from the Spartans, they would send one Spartan.
Yeah,
And it wasn't clear whether that was because they were taking the piss or because they were saying one Spartan is so hard, that's
yes,
all you need to solve the problem. And then, the reason that's the name of the movie is because there's a crisis and they only send one guy and he's the Spartan. So it works in the movie. In this world, it's not just one, but it's only three high elves that they send. So because they've got to deal with the dark elves, you've got the greatest invasion of chaos that has been seen for thousands of years, threatening to destroy the old world, and they send
yeah,
three elves to step up and help. Fortunately, those elves are like, Teclis, so
yes.
actually is able to do something. But that is quite a cool moment of just like,
Yeah, it speaks to their prowess, but I think it also speaks to their superiority.
mm,
And look, we're going to send these guys are going to help you. They are going to be amazing battlefield leaders, the magic, but it's going to be on the blood of your humans, on the blood of your
mm,
troops that your lands are saved. We are sending you that help as almost sort of like an advisory executive form, isn't it?
yeah,
Rather than we're not sending you boots on the ground though. You do that yourself. So there's an
yeah,
element of that in it as well, with the kind of almost the leading into the arrogance of the high elves. But it's
yeah,
very,
that's
I
fair.
find the way they're portrayed in the book's really clever as well. I don't want to jump ahead a little bit, but so we talked about, you got that nice set you up part when it talks about the different lands and the different troop types, etc. Then you've got the tale of the kings, and then you've got the rest of the book, haven't you? But and Tyrion and Teclis and Eltharion are almost presented in more detail right at the end of the book. It's the
Yeah.
book almost saying, this is the modern time.
Mm,
We've told you a little bit about some of their great deeds, but this is them now. This is the game you're playing.
yeah.
There's a real narrative arc to the book in terms of the way it's sort of presented to you. I think it's really, really
That's a
well
great
thought out and
shout.
really well
Yeah.
done.
Yeah. Yeah, you're dead right. Yeah, because you get the history, and then you get the army that you're playing, and then you get
Yeah,
the people who are the legends of today. You're totally right. Yeah. I
this is
mean,
the
and all
current day
three,
heroes.
only three characters, only three special
Mm,
characters here. Not as many as there were so many in the Empire Armies book, and loads in the Eldar Codex from around the same time. But yeah, you get three characters. You get Teclis and Tyrion and Eltharion, and all of them have just great storytelling. I think.
mm.
I suspect it's Bill King who's writing those
I
sort
get
of
that was my
story
assumption.
segments.
That was my assumption. Yeah.
The reason I would be willing to put money down on it is because when someone casts a particular spell, there is the smell of ozone in the air and the crackling, and I
Yeah,
think
it's his style, isn't
every
it?
single one of the Gotrek and Felix books has had that happen. Thankful you constantly you're getting the smell of ozone after a spell. I mean, it's great. It's such a cool way of describing.
Yeah,
But yeah, I think that does say William King to me.
yeah, it's slightly twee little charm to it, but I
It
do
is
like it.
charming.
Enjoy
Yeah,
it.
it is.
I wonder also, we're talking about less special characters. I wonder if there's a business thought around this as well. Whereas the Empire book, we're going to put all these different profiles in. Half of them aren't going to have miniatures. They're just going to be, you could almost build your own electors as well, because you could
Mm,
buy the sword and add that as a special weapon. Whereas here it's a little bit more, well, we've made three special character miniatures. These are the three that is the story of. These are the three profiles. That's what you get. You don't need any of the rest. You build them out of the regular list. Maybe there's a little bit more of, because there's a little bit of streamlining in a good way in this book. I think it feels like it's, as much as I love that Empire book because it was so full, this feels the full nature of it is in the depth of that history
mm.
and how well it's done. But it feels like it's a tighter edit almost on the overall book and the way it's presented. And I wonder if that's some more of the learnings of producing those books.
Yeah, quite possibly. I think that's an interesting point. And yeah, it does make you wonder: did they only have three special character miniatures? So they sort of had to reverse engineer. Okay, well, we need three times as many pages for each one of them because we don't
Yeah.
have nine special characters or however many it was for the Empire. Or did they write these amazing stories and they were like, well, let's just not include anybody else then as a result? But
Potentially.
yeah, I mean, Eltharion, because they're obviously, a character who's around for a long time and features in later editions as well. Eltharion, the Grim, pretty rough story himself, and that's quite a cool one. Turns up to fight off from the Paunch and the Goblin invasion. I quite like that all of Eltharion's lore is basically like retrofitting the actual fourth edition box set. So the starter
Yes.
box, High Elves versus Goblins, you essentially you don't need to justify it, but it essentially justifies that box set because you even get down to there's a scenario included in the original starter box that was I always forget how to pronounce it. I've written it down to make sure I get it. The Battle for Morgthrond Pass, which is the
Yeah.
scenario that is Eltharion versus Grom. You get the cardboard standees in the actual box as
Yes.
well, so that you can have Eltharion, and the wyverns and stuff. I just think it's a really cool way to tie all of that stuff back together and say, well, if
Mm.
you've bought this book because you got the starter box, here is how you can sort of, here's how you move from that to the next part of the story, and here's the other sort of elements of it. And again, you get Grom just walks away at the end of it. So he's still out
Yes.
there doing something. I think it just actually say he's never seen again. And I don't know if that's true. I don't think that's true. But I almost would have preferred it if it was like Grom the Paunch will return
Yes.
in some future adventure.
He's been on a diet. He's worked out. He's no longer Grom the Paunch.
It's great though. Yeah, it's
Yeah,
like Eltharion's story is really good as well.
yeah. I think you're right. It's a really nice connection with that box set, and I wonder again if it's just a bit of joined up thinking and a bit of planning. Really, is that we're still selling this as a starter set. We've got these cardboard standees in there. What do we want people to do? Is we want people to love those characters and their rules so much that they think, well, it's a shame this is cardboard. Let's go and buy this miniature. Whereas if they just invented three new characters, you lose the impact and the excitement you've got of this plastic army with these cardboard standees, and you really make people want to say, oh, look, these are the full rules for those now. These are the guys. Well, let's go and buy the full miniatures then.
Hmm.
I think a lot of people did as well. There was definitely a lot of Teclises being running around
Well, I mean, I
throughout the year.
think yeah, hugely important those the Tyrion and the Teclis models. Jez Goodwin's incredible sculpt,
Mm.
and I wouldn't be surprised if they saw those sculpts and then said we don't need any other special characters like these. You've nailed it with these guys.
Yeah, potentially,
Because
yeah.
they're so good. They were just they are iconic characters because the miniatures are so iconic. I think everybody
Yes.
wanted them.
Yeah, I think so. And we may well see Teclis turning up in the old world at some point, even if it's just in
Yeah,
the
I'd love it.
lore. I
Yeah,
mean, he at some point, if they advance the storyline, he takes them away from being hedge wizards and teaches them enough to
yeah,
form the
helps.
colleges of magic, and
Yeah,
that's not too far off happening as well. So we're talking the Great War Against Chaos, aren't we? Which isn't too far off that current timeline, that
yeah,
current new old timeline,
yeah. Because
wherever we
actually,
are.
yeah, what's happening right now in the old world, time's
Mm,
all relative, obviously, right now in the old world
yes.
is about concurrent probably with the Dark Elf invasion.
Yeah.
And, this is where Teclis and Tyrion prove themselves as
Yes.
heroes, and then they come and help out or at least Teclis does come and help out for the with Magnus the Pious.
It does. Yeah. I mean, they move around a little bit with the old world. I think some of the different arcane journals have slightly different
Yes, I
time
suppose that's true, isn't
periods,
it?
which is good as well. It shows they're willing to tell stories within that kind of broader spectrum. But
Yeah,
I think the original launch date was like 2276 or something like that,
something
wasn't
around
it?
that, right?
29. So
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
So yeah, good. It's good.
It is good. It is good. I mean, what did you think of the color section? So there's quite a lot of heavy metal material.
There
There's an
is, there
amazing
is.
Tyrion and Teclis sort of painting guide by Mike McVeigh.
Yeah, this is White Dwarf stuff, isn't it?
I
Really,
think so. Yeah.
and I love those. I'm a huge Mike McVeigh fan anyway. It's I've talked about this on other things, but he's a couple of articles he did on a wood elf army in White Dwarf was very impactful for me as a young war gamer, and it didn't affect the way I painted back then because it just wasn't good enough to take that instruction and think about it. But it was definitely inspiring from a visual point of view, and so I've always loved his articles. And yeah, these articles are brilliant. And then hearing him talk about those iconic miniatures and those iconic paint schemes, it's quite cool to see them in their not quite the original publication because, as I said, he would have been in a White Dwarf, but to kind of see him or read him talking about what he did, it's just amazing stuff. Takes me
Yeah.
back.
Yeah, it's very, very, yeah, and it sounds ridiculous to say, but it's very of its time. There,
Mm.
that was just a really nice, accessible way. Actually, this is true of a few things in this book. Like it, they seem very conscious of the fact that this is the first High Elf Armies book. This is part of a new-ish series
Hmm.
of Armies books. There's only a few that have been released at this point. You might be new to Warhammer, you might be new to fantasy, you might be new to gaming and painting. So
Yeah.
most stuff in here is kind of presented. It really brings you into it and sort of explains how
Yes.
it works. And I think a good example of that is the battle report. So it's originally from White Dwarf. So it's the Battle
Hmm.
of Red Axe Pass. It's Nigel Stillman versus Alan Perry, and it is High Elves versus Goblins.
Yeah.
But it does a great job of basically saying, okay, well, here's how this works. Here's why a battle report is structured in this way, and here's how we tell the story of the battle, and here's why this particular tactic was employed, and here's the rules of a fanatic and why that's relevant. So you kind of get this really nice. There's not a lot of like assumed knowledge, which, and I know as a hobby matures, and when this was at a time when battle reports were relatively new as well.
Yes. Yeah.
We've now had 1,000 White Dwarf battle reports, so you're probably not going to say what's a battle report every single time. But there's almost this, and I don't know if it's innocence or nostalgia or what, but it's actually just quite nice to read something that is just a little bit more accessible in that way for some reason.
Yeah. Yeah. It's really accessible. And I may have said this talking about the Empire book that if I wanted to suggest a background history for a faction to my 10-year-old, I would say read one of these books over reading the eighth edition book, as much as it might be visually more exciting to look at for a young person. Again, I think the language used is just, like we said, accessible, overusing that word, but that's the best way of describing it. It's very straightforward, and the same with painting techniques and things. And this battle report is of its time. I do love that the High Elves have over 500 more points than the
Yeah,
Goblins to
yeah,
make sure they win.
yeah. I did. I
I
thought
know there's
that.
a
Yeah,
narrative scenario there, but
yeah.
you to
Because
think
they said
there's only
it's
going to be one winner.
yeah. We're going to use we just wanted to use everything we had painted in
Yeah,
in the
which is
studio.
great. That's the way the game should be played, and it's very Nigel Stillman that as well. That
Yeah,
ethos of just play what you got painted. If it doesn't match
yeah.
your opponent, it doesn't matter.
At least
Don't
they
change.
did come up with like the scenario. It's an ambush. The high elves are deployed right the way across the entire battlefield because they're in a sort of train, making their way across enemy territory, and then the goblins have ambushed them from either side. It's a good little battle report.
Yeah,
It,
they tried to even it up in that way,
they
didn't they?
did. It very quickly feels like like what direction this is going to go, with the exception of the fanatics, the goblin fanatics,
Yes,
which were always just obscenely strong and just
yes,
ridiculous.
and they still are.
Yes, how on earth you balance fanatics is just it's impossible. It can't be done.
Yeah,
But they are incredibly good fun at the same time. So it's such a tough.
They were too good to get rid of. But yeah,
Yeah,
you can't balance them. All you can do is limit them
yeah,
to a sensible amount.
yeah.
Um,
Because in one, I think they say in one turn, a fanatic takes out 17 elves because he goes through two separate units, and it's just
yes,
mind-blowingly absurd that that was even
yeah,
possible. I mean, it's funny then that all three, I think, just like one embeds himself in a hillside, one just wanders out into the middle of nowhere. Like so,
that's the
they
random
are,
nature of them, isn't it?
yeah,
Devastating or nothing, and that's the thing.
yeah.
They can come out of your unit and go straight into a tree, and then you feel like you've wasted your points on them. But
But then you also
yeah,
have
they've
like that
always
high
been
elf
like that.
mage was just vaporizing people as he just decimates the goblin shaman. He decimates the general. Just one shots them with his magic
Yeah,
powers.
Isle's always been quite good at magic, haven't they?
Yeah, but yeah, it was a fun
Um,
read. I thought it was good.
It was great, and it reminds me so much. Remember having that starter set and collecting like you both armies
Mm.
and painting them like the studio armies or attempting to. And it just reminded, yeah, there's so much nostalgia there from
Yeah,
probably the best time playing Warhammer ever. Even though it wasn't much playing, it's very, very cool. And so much of those armies are just those plastics from the box set, aren't they? And I think I had quite a lot of the extras. The Spider Riders Shaman was, I remember having that miniature and painting that. And very, very cool.
yeah. There was some
Very,
really
very
nice
cool.
minis. And the heavy metal sections have
Mm.
just got so many beautiful examples of the high elf army. I mean, do you have any favorites from this era in terms of whether that's miniatures or units? Like anything from this book that is like a standout that you think that's
Oh,
they're a great
I
regiment.
still love. It's a nostalgia thing, but I do love those spearmen and the bowmen, the elves. Just it's so much nostalgia for them, and
Yeah.
so much so that last year I bought a battered fourth ed copy box, and there's lots of stuff missing, but I bought it just to get. It was really cheap as well, about £30 or something. Really dented, and not all the miniatures were there, but just so I could get hold of some, so I could do a
Mm.
painting tutorial. So you can find it on my channel. There is one for one of the old bowmen, but yeah, I just they hold a lot of memories for me, that box set.
Yeah.
More so than the second ed 40k one did, even though I did the same thing, painted both factions in there and kept it all in different points. Going, I'm going to start this army, I'm going to start that. But this one more, just got so invested in each army at different eras. I think I finished the High Elves first, and then it was a case of, oh, now I want to do the goblins. But yeah, it's hard to pick an individual miniature, but it was
Yeah.
probably the more simple ones, just because of that age. I wasn't going out and buying loads and loads of blister packs, so he was making do with things, and sometimes your hero was just a standard miniature that you painted differently or
Yeah.
found a different sword to stick on because you couldn't go and get a metal command set always or something
Yeah.
like that. But
Was the shield you were most proud of that you'd painted?
yes, yeah, sometimes as simple as
Yeah.
that. The one with the best eyes,
Yeah. Yeah,
the
absolutely.
only non-cross-eyed goblin in the unit.
Yeah, I mean they're classic miniatures. They're absolutely brilliant. There's
What
like
about you? Did you were more of a dark elf lover, so maybe yeah.
yeah, well, I mean, but I had a much bigger proper dark elf force. So
Mm,
I collected high elves, but didn't like and orcs and goblins. I had some stuff. I mean, a lot of my orc and goblin army was actually from like Warhammer Quest.
yeah.
So that's how I filled out the armies. So I had high elves, but really it was just the plastics. I can't remember what, if anything, else I had. Dark elves was a proper army that I'd fully built, fully painted, very, very, very badly, but like it was a full effort to put together a proper Dark Elf army. Although I was very proud at the time of my Black Ark Corsairs because I did something with the sort of the Cold One cloaks. I can't remember what
Yeah,
paints I used, but they came out really nice, which was a rarity for any miniature I painted.
sounds
I
amazing.
was very proud of them.
I never
But
had Dark Elves ever, never
no,
ever.
I mean,
And I drooled over the Marauder. There was a double page spread in I can't remember which issue around this era of the Marauder Dark Elf you could buy this full army set or something,
Right.
and the
Yep.
witch elves were just amazing. And the Colburn riders, the Marauder ones, were just beautiful. I
Yeah.
remember there's one of those pages I thought one day I'd love to buy this, but I never done it.
Oh, yeah. I mean,
Maybe one day.
incredible. I don't think I would have a dark elf. I was much more like I enjoyed playing bad guys more back then. I think I
Mm.
prefer playing good guys or gooder guys these days. Not exclusively, but generally. But yeah, in terms of the miniatures from the High Elves that I have always loved and would love to have a unit of one day, like nicely painted, I think that the White Lions are just really cool. Just a great unit.
Yes.
They look great. The miniatures are amazing. Um, I also, I do actually have some, but the repeater bolt throwers, I just think are
Yes.
great. Such a cool design. They're just so elegant, but then they in game are so powerful. Like it just
Mhm.
is. They're great. I really like. I really like the Dark Elf repeater bolt throwers as well.
That was one metal. I think that was something I remember buying and adding to the. It might have been the only thing I added new in blister, so to speak, that I bought
Yeah,
with pocket money was the repeater bolt throw. It's definitely the first thing I added to that fourth edition box set was that blister.
yeah. I mean, they're just great. Just really, really cool. Yeah. So, I mean, I think I have found renewed respect for the High Elves after to reading through the book, and I think that they do what the book does really well. I think is walk that fine line between these being yes, they are superior and they are arrogant, and their mistakes in the past have led them either to decadence or like the darkness that they've invited in, but there's the nobility and the strength and the wisdom. Like there's, and I know every army book always presents a faction as if they are like great.
Hmm.
That's what happens here, but I think there is a real nice balancing act between those two sides of things. You don't just get the haughty jerk elves who are, they get everything they deserve that sometimes you see from like other perspectives. It kind of seems like the high elves are well, actually, it's their own fault, and they won't help
Yeah.
anybody else, and they're causing all these problems. There's a version of it in this book that just paints them as quite a tragic people who have made mistakes, but have also done an awful lot to try and stop, those mistakes from ending the world. Basically, a lot of sacrifice and a lot
Yes.
of like no nobility in there. So, yeah, I've come out of revisiting this book with a very much with a deep respect for the High Elves again.
Yes, yeah, I think you're right. I think I know what you're getting at as well, is that the way the history is portrayed here, and I suppose in the what we may find in the other books if we look at them, is that while it's from their perspective, it is very much still a history that tells warts and all. Whereas at
Mm.
the way that the lore is portrayed in later books is very much as this is your team, and we're going to tell you that they're the best from their angle. We're going to sort of do it from their completely, almost completely from their perspective.
Mm.
And you almost then need to read the other books to get that wider story, whereas this still feels like a fairly reliable history of the elves. It feels like it's written
Yeah,
by a non-elf or someone with it is a bit more objective, so to speak.
yeah, yeah. I think that's a fair way to put it, actually. Yeah, and I think there's still lots of stuff that will be added with future editions. There's lots of changes that will be made to this history to accommodate new characters, new events, and all that sort of stuff. Rework and revise some stuff. I mean, this book itself was a revision to what the elves had been in third edition of Warhammer
Hmm.
Fantasy Battle, even down to Ulthuan itself was not always the sort of ringed island. It was an archipelago at one point of just like random islands. There are some
Yeah.
maps where it just doesn't exist, which is fun. So like there's lots of changes made to create this version of the High Elves for the fourth edition, and this is the foundation for everything that will happen afterwards. I think
Yeah.
as we saw with the Empire, they did a great job of basically bringing together all of these great ideas that were floating around in different spaces in different ways, giving them a new visual and narrative identity for the fourth edition. and so, like,
Yeah.
laid down all of the foundational stones and work for some great storytelling that's going to happen over the course of the next couple of editions.
Yeah, it's so clear that this fourth edition launch, and while the game itself will evolve from edition to edition in terms of the style of play, and we'll go through different eras of infantry and special characters and heroes becoming the fourth edition in both books we've looked at now is the launch of the lore as that still exists
Yeah.
at the end of eighth edition before the end times, and then almost again now in the old world. It's that it is the same recognizable lore that has become the backbone of what we know, and that's changed far less than the actual game it has itself. But prior to that, the first three editions of the game, obviously the game was a different animal completely, and
Yeah.
this is that step change that maintains
Yeah. Yeah. This is the creation of the Warhammer world and what the High
Warhammer that
Elves
we
are.
know.
Yes. Yeah. Absolutely. And that's neither a good thing nor a bad thing necessarily. And you can go back and you can play second or first or third edition if
Yes,
you want, and later
it's all there
editions
to
as
be
well.
enjoyed.
Absolutely. But it is just really interesting to compare how that evolved and changed into this, and then how little it changes after this. Because
Yes.
it feels like they worked it out. They sort of were like, okay, here's what high elves are, and then we can build on top of that now for
Yeah.
like future stuff.
100%.
Mm.
100%.
Yeah, I think it will be interesting. I think for some of the other factions, if and when we get to them, because obviously this is there were there was probably never again as many of these sort of resets or sort of brand new armies and factions kind of taking on their new forms. Fourth edition, that happened sort of almost across the board.
Yeah.
We will see that again with other certain factions. Obviously, Undead underwent a significant change between editions, and then Chaos, which we will be covering, they went in a different direction as they sort of were. They found out what they thought chaos should be and how chaos should
Mhm.
be sort of set up. So there is some of that to see and explore. But yeah, I think for high elves, this book is still super relevant. It's still a fantastic introduction to the faction, and yeah, is a great companion piece to even the old world. The Arcane Journal is about to come out. This is
Yeah.
perfect to read this and get all of the deep history and then some slightly tweaked modern interpretations of
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. You could read probably any of the editions will do, but this, from my own point of view, my experience was so accessible to read as a kind of as a basis for it, and then read your lore in the old world core rule book and your arcane journal
Mm.
whenever that arrives. We don't, at the time of recording, we don't know when it's coming out. You never know. By the time this is out, it could already be out. Who knows?
Yeah,
But exciting. It's going to be exciting to see what they add to it, to the
yeah, I'm
story.
looking forward to it. I think, but yeah, like I say, a renewed respect for the High Elves. I'm. It really did make me think that I would like to read some of the longer stories that are about some of these characters. So would I want to go
Mm,
and read a book about Teclis? Would I want to read a book about Calador and sort of explore some of those stories? Because most of those exist. Good authors from the Black Library have
yeah.
really gone through all of the background and gone, right, let's tell the story of this person or this character because they're really super interesting. So yeah, it did make me think, okay, I'm quite intrigued about a little bit more high elf history, so maybe I should go and check it out.
Yeah, definitely. Tips in the comments below. I've barely read anything, one chapter, but I've started reading Defenders of Ulthuan
Right.
this very week. So uh, maybe it's because I've been painting some high elves for up and coming content. But it's yeah, the first chapter was very good. I like Graham
Mm.
McNeil, so good stuff. And I'd love to know people's tips for. Is there anything a little bit more sort of micro level rather than all being the biggest character? I don't know if those things exist for in high elf themes. I know for Empire there is plenty of that. There's stories about witch hunters. There's stories about warrior priests, as well as big stories about sort of emperors and things like that. So I don't know if that exists by elves. It always seems like it's a very big story that they're telling all the time, and sometimes it's nice to get a feeling for what it's like to be a bit sort of closer to the ranks.
Mm. Yeah, it's a great point, actually. Yeah. Yeah, recommendations for high elf literature. Absolutely
Mhm.
would welcome those. But yes, I think we're going to be covering off some more. We've got plenty more books we want to cover in the GW Book Club. Obviously, we're completing our 17 book run of the original GW books. We've got one left to go, which is Beasts in Velvet by Jack Yeovil. Very excited about that one. Honestly, cannot wait to get into discussion about that because Kim Newman's work as Jack Yeovil has been absolutely stunning. Really, really good. But once we've finished that, we're going to be getting into a lot of different books from the various periods of Games Workshop history. So I think I already mentioned we're going to read Gav Thorpe's Malekith. So we're going to see what that's all about. From there, we may take a look at some 40k novels. I know we've talked about the potential to read some Horus Heresy stuff and some other 40k books as well, and loads more fantasy stuff. There's a lot of really cool books I'm very excited to read and talk about. And of course, more of these non-fiction. So I think odds are it's pretty safe a bet that we will be doing a non-fiction book roughly to coincide with each of the old world releases. It feels like a good way to go. What exactly those books will be, I think we're still open to discussion, aren't we, Stu? Whether it's the first book or the second book or a special book from an era.
Yeah, it's difficult. Some of them aren't as straightforward as others. This was an easy one to
Yeah,
choose, right?
exactly. Yes, exactly that. Because it's not they didn't do every faction for the fourth edition, so
No.
there are some where you're like, okay, well, when would be the best time to jump in on Wood Elves or Beasts of Chaos or whatever else, or if some other faction were to turn up, what book would you read then? Who knows? But I think I would quite like if we can find the time to maybe delve into things like the Realm of Chaos books and some of
Mm,
that kind of stuff as well because I think there's some cool stories in those books.
absolutely. Absolutely. Definitely.
Yeah. But until we get to all of that, Stu, where can people find you on the internet?
Miniature Realms. It's almost like I'm wearing a t-shirt with it on. Miniature Realms for lots of old world game chat and painting at the moment, but other things as well.
Fantastic. Yeah, that's every single social media, I think, isn't it?
Always, yeah. It tends to be the way to go. It's the same
Yeah.
stuff shared on every platform. People love that.
Well, I'm the same. Jordan Sorcery on pretty much every platform. And yeah, we'll have links in the description down below. We'll share more information about what we're going to be reading in the future on the book club. We'll probably share it on our social media. I actually do a Patreon post that's free for anybody to read on my Patreon. That is the books I'm planning to read for the next month. So I'm going to be publishing that at the just before the start of every single month. That is literally here's the fiction I want to read, the Warhammer stuff, the non-fiction stuff, the book club stuff, and then just any old random fiction as well. Because I'm going to be reading some non-Games Workshop books this year. I'm going to get back into just general reading. I'll be reading the Color of Magic by Terry Pratchett is one of my non.
I don't think that counts as general reading.
Yes, I mean it's pretty adjacent, but I'm taking one step at a time, and I'm going to be reading all kinds of stuff. So I'm excited. It's a big, not resolution, but a thing for me is to read more wider stuff and fill in some gaps in my own literature history. So yes, you can go and check out my Patreon and find out more information about all that kind of fun stuff. But for now, thank you very much for watching. I'm Jordan, and this is Jordan Sorcery.